This episode of Working is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing your laundry right now? Well, podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Working Overtime, the bi-weekly advice-focused profiterole to working's croque-en-bouche. I'm your host, June Thomas.
And I'm your other host, Ronald Young Jr. So, June, besides making me very hungry with your analogies, what are we talking about today?
Well, Ronald, I hope you are ready for a bit of a nerdy one, because I think it might finally be time to talk about something I'm really interested in, but we haven't talked about much on the show, and that is note-taking and PKM. And PKM is one of those if you know terms, so before you start, it's probably a good idea for me to offer some background for those listeners who aren't totally steeped in this world. So, PKM is personal knowledge management. And in the last few years, a lot of software programs have been developed to help people build their PKMs. Some of the better known ones are Obsidian, Logseek, Anytype, Capacities, Tana, Rome Research, Craft, Remnote. There are a lot, though you can also use mainstream programs like Evernote, OneNote, Apple Notes, and maybe even Google Notes. The idea is that you use a program to store your ideas in a format that allows you to revisit them, develop them, and constantly improve on them. I don't think a podcast is the place to go into the weeds of how these programs work and concepts like bi-directional linking and community plugins. YouTube is the best place for that kind of demonstration, I think. But I figured it might be useful, or at least maybe get some people interested in them, for me to share how I use them in my work. Before we get to that, though, I want to ask if you have any sort of note-taking or personal knowledge management system. I know that most of your work is in audio storytelling, but as anyone who has worked on a podcast knows, they can be incredibly complex projects with a lot of management needed to keep track of interviews and guests and clips and narration and so much more. So what tools do you use for all of that?
So it's funny that you mentioned this, because it kind of feels like I'm being read for filth right now, because I do I do not have a formal method. I have been using Keep Notes from Google and Recorder from Google a lot, and especially more recently as I have multiple ideas running in my head right now. I also create docs in Google Drive that eventually turn into outlines and then scripts. I also write things down in a notebook, which now, based on everything you described, seems completely unhelpful.
Oh, no.
But the long answer is I'm a mess. And actually, that's not even a long answer. It's a short answer. I'm a mess.
Ronald, first of all, everybody needs a notebook. At least one, maybe at least hundreds. I've got probably thousands. So don't ever apologize for having a notebook. And I would never call you a mess. And I would never knowingly read you to filth. But, well, okay. I'm going to tell you, you know what, Ronald? You need a zettelkasten. Has anybody ever told you that before?
Never.
I think I've mentioned the term zettelkasten a couple of times over the years that we've been doing Working without providing a proper definition. So this term was coined by a German sociologist of the 20th century called Niklas Luhmann. In the mid-20th century, he came up with a note-taking system where he would make notes on index card, one idea per card, and he would then add a sort of code to the card that allowed him to connect the idea on that card to other ideas on other cards. He then placed those cards in a zettelkasten, which is usually translated as a slip box, which I'm afraid is a very unhelpful translation. Who knows what that is? But I tell you, that term is certainly shorter than big box you put index cards in.
Oh, so like a suggestion box?
A really big suggestion box. Yeah, I mean, I think I must say I tried it for a while and I did buy some boxes and then like, paper is not going to work for this thing. As an academic, I think most of Luhmann's notes came from books and papers and dissertations. Nowadays, we normies would probably add podcasts, magazine articles, documentaries, and lots of other sources. But the special sauce in Luhmann's system was the code that allowed him to connect ideas, so that when he would sit down to write an article or a book, he would go to his box, which eventually contained 90,000 cards, and use his coding system to pick out a bunch of related notes, which he would then stitch together to create something new. And the reason that this honestly very obscure German academic and his zettelkasten technique is a figure of interest these days is because it allowed Luhmann to be incredibly prolific. Luhmann's story, which was told really compellingly in Sonka Aaron's book, How to Write Smart Notes, was taken up by a lot of bloggers and online content creators who need or want to publish a lot. And it's easy to see the appeal of remixing and reusing rather than having to start from absolute zero every time you need to publish a story. Obviously, Luhmann wasn't the only person to work with index cards, but his massive output has made him the most famous, at least in certain nerdy circles. As I mentioned, there are lots of apps and programs that facilitate the kind of note-taking and note connecting that Luhmann used in a more efficient and portable format. I use Obsidian, and being able to search all my notes and link them together is massively helpful. It really makes you feel like you have a massive brain. But I know I'm talking a lot. How's it sounding so far, Ronald?
Well, I'm not going to lie. While you were talking, I Googled Obsidian, and I mean, I'm scared. But I immediately know that I need something like this if I ever hope to improve my work, because what you're describing is kind of how I've been expecting to use my Google Notes, where I'm just like, oh, I wrote something about this and I'd like try to find it, but I'd love to be able to be more self-referential in ways that I've written down these stubs everywhere that probably lends itself to be a big, good article, but I can't find all the pieces and I am starting from scratch every time I get to the page. So it would be helpful. Even the original pre-technology version sounds like a dream. So I'm on board. You've sold me.
All right, good. I'll talk more about how I use Obsidian and a couple of other programs to manage my thoughts and ideas. But first, we're going to take a short break. We've all been there. You have a question about your credit card. You call the number for help and can't get a hold of anyone. If only you had a Discover card. With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right, a real person. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the home gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, and affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
Hey listeners, do you have any tips or questions about the creative process? Get in touch and share your advice. You can email us at working@slate.com, or even better, you can call us and leave a message at 304-933-9675. Again, that's 304-933-WORK, W-O-R-K.
And we're back.
So Jude, what kind of things do you put into Obsidian? You keep talking about ideas and notes, but what do these things look like?
Well, one thing that's key to understanding these pieces of software is that what I've been calling notes or ideas are typically separate files. And in the case of Obsidian, they're markup files. But it's probably best if I give you an example from a story I was working on last week. I was writing a piece about the gorgeous, sometimes completely unhinged aesthetics of lesbian and feminist magazines of the 1970s. And the first thing I had to do was really spend some time with the magazines I was going to write about, most of which were pretty short-lived and raw. I mean, the women who created these publications weren't journalists or designers or artists, but they really wanted to connect and share ideas. So they put out magazines, even if they had no experience. They didn't know much about putting out paper, but they knew what they wanted to achieve. So they wrote about that motivation. So I read a bunch of articles from these magazines, and as I was reading them, I jotted down observations and a few notes in a new Obsidian file. Now, a true zettelkasten system requires atomic notes. That is, each note should contain a single idea. That made a lot of sense when people were writing on index cards. Brevity is key. And it absolutely makes sense to keep things as concise as possible, because you don't want to be overwhelmed by a big slab of words when you open up a note. That will not be generative. But over the years, I've been using this system. I have relaxed that atomic note rule a bit and have come to rely a little bit more on the search function. So I put the observations I made while looking at these magazines into a note, which is to say a file. I then did a search in my existing notes, my database, or in Obsidian terms, my vault, to see if the names of the magazines I was writing about appeared in any of my old notes. Had they come up in research I'd done for other projects in the past? And even though these magazines were pretty obscure, I did get results for most of them. And looking through those notes, I found some really interesting things that I had known at some point because I put them into Obsidian, but I then apparently completely forgot about them. And eventually, I looked at all the information I had gathered now and then and wrote a story. After a while, when you've been using a piece of software long enough, you do find connections between the things you're writing about now and the things you thought about months or years, or I guess at some point in the future, decades ago. And it really does feel like magic.
You sold me a while ago, but you're convincing me more with every word that you say. Your mention of finding notes from older projects makes me think that this kind of system only works if you tend to focus on one topic. In your case, queer women's history, or in Luhmann's case, academic sociology. Is it worth setting up this kind of database for someone like me who has a lot of different ideas and I jump from idea stub to idea stub?
Well, you're definitely right that they are more generative if a lot of your notes are on similar subjects, but it's definitely not a waste of time if you write and think about and make notes about a lot of subjects. For one thing, most of these programs allow you to have more than one vault. So if you have one long-lasting interest, not necessarily a work or creative thing even, you could keep that separate. I know from watching YouTube that a lot of religious people use Obsidian to keep track of sermon notes and their own biblical studies, and those notes might be walled off from their work notes. But I suspect that for many of us, even if we don't think we have one big interest, a lot of the things we think about, the books we read, the larger life topics that interest us, boil down to the same foundational ideas. And actually, this brings me to what I think is the most important part of a PKM. If you are so inclined, making notes and having access to your ideas is really fun. But the benefit comes from working with them, from revisiting them and thinking about them. It's not about collecting. It's about reflecting and making something new from the things you have already read and thought about. I've let it go a bit in the last couple of months because I've been crazy busy on other things, but making time to go through old notes is fun, but it's also really productive. And I wonder, Ronald, is this something you ever do? You've talked about having lots of notes in various Google things. Do you ever look through old notebooks or computer folders when you're trying to create something new?
So I haven't done it recently, and it's funny because I'm thinking about all the times I took notes on stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, I'm thinking about papers around my house with notes and thinking about like ways maybe to scan those in digitally so that I can actually start referencing them in a meaningful way.
Once an IT guy, always an IT guy.
Exactly, right? But what I'm typically doing is trying to find something specific when I'm looking through my notes.
Yeah.
But this conversation is making me think that I probably have an existing good idea somewhere in my notes already, and I just need to use that search function and find it.
Yeah, I mean, that actually was what pushed me to get into these programs. It was that feeling of, I know that I've written this down somewhere. I could even picture where on a notebook it is. Like, you know, you can do that thing where it's on the left side of the page, it's in the middle of the page. But does that mean you can find it? No. And so just knowing that search, which, you know, isn't infallible, but it sure does help. So I just think that anything you can do to enable search just really makes your life a whole lot easier. So we'll be back with some final thoughts about the wonderful world of personal knowledge management after this.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Raise your hand if you are burnt out.
If email is something that gives you like a shiver in your spine.
You are not alone. I'm Shirley Leung, host of Say More from the Boston Globe. Our new series is Beating Burnout. We'll hear from Cal Newport, Krista Tibbett, and more. We'll talk about breaking bad habits and forming new ones.
The cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other.
Say More from the Boston Globe. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Listeners, I just want to remind you that if you're enjoying working overtime, please follow so that you never miss an episode. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to rate or review the show. It really does help new listeners to find us. And if Overcast is your app of choice, please hit the star to recommend the episode to others.
All right, we're back. I want to address the big criticism that non-PKM people tend to make about these programs.
Okay, let me guess. It's a big procrastination project. You're spending a lot of time managing notes when you could be writing. Is it really all that productive? Isn't it kind of a waste of time? I'm ahead of you.
Bingo, that's the one. And I have to admit, it definitely can be. When I read a book that seems remotely relevant to something I might one day write about or maybe podcast about or whatever, I highlight passages, I make notes, and then I look at those marginal comments and process them in Obsidian. That is, I make notes about them. And there have been times when I spent days processing a book and I've asked myself if that was a good use of my time. And the truth is, sometimes it hasn't been. I think you should always extract the minimum of quotes and notes from a book or any other source. And the amount of time you're spending on it is definitely something to be conscious of. But you can for sure waste time making notes. I've seen some people obsessing about creating perfect notes, having a perfectly organized vault. Thank goodness that is not my particular weakness. The fact is, though, that there are some books or dissertations or whatever that are so relevant to your central topic of interest that it absolutely is worth spending days on considering the facts and the ideas that they contain. I've also heard people say that they wished that they had been keeping notes about their reading and their feelings and their life lessons from back when they were in high school so that their vault would be all the bigger today. And I think that is just a really clear indication that it is a very addictive thing.
You've spent a lot of time in Obsidian, but you used the word system earlier, which makes me suspect that there are other programs and apps involved.
Oh, once again, Ronald, you are right. I use a program called Readwise to import notes and highlights from books and web articles. I use DevonThink as a database of articles, images, and other sources. That's where I store other people's ideas for the most part. But once again, I want to stress that the software isn't the point. What's important is revisiting the things that you have chosen to keep in your digital archive. Even if you're not a PKM head, most of us have a Google Drive or something similar where we just park digital files. And part of us thinks, oh, this is going to really help me down the road. But it only helps you if you revisit it later. You know, when you're working on something, whether it's a piece of professional writing or a wedding toast, searching your Google Drive to see if there's anything in there that might inform your current project and make it richer. Like, you need to search to find out. Humans forget things, but computers don't. So ask them to remind you about your past. So, Ronald, I've been doing a lot of talking this episode, but I am curious if any of this has made you interested in setting up a PKM. A little earlier in the show, you said it did, but the deeper I've gotten, have you changed your mind? Where are you standing PKM-wise right now?
It absolutely has me thinking about ways to revisit all my old notes. I am thinking about all of my ideas that have been parked for a little bit, and then they're like caught up in the planning stages. I'm thinking about those ideas. But the hesitation that I have, even though I know that this is good and I know it would be well for me, is that I feel a little overwhelmed. Where would I get started? And what would you tell a newbie about starting something like this?
I have to say that actually I think that everybody gets overwhelmed because most of these programs allow you to set them up yourself, which is great. You have a lot of freedom, you have a lot of agency, but that also means that, you know, you're not going into something that's all set up already. You've got to set it up, and that can be overwhelming. As a longtime podcaster, talking to a podcaster of note, it's hard for me to say this, but YouTube really is the best place to learn more because it really helps to see people's screens and hear what they do in the programs. So go to YouTube, search for PKM or Obsidian or Second Brain and enjoy.
I will do that.
That's all the time we have for this episode, but let me leave you with one last piece of advice. I think you should follow Working wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have ideas for things we could do better or questions that you would like us to address, we want to hear from you. You can send us an email at working@slate.com or give us a ring, leave a voicemail at 304-933-WORK.
If you'd like to support what we do, sign up for Slate Plus at slate.com/working plus. You'll get bonus content, including exclusive episodes of Slow Burn and Decoder Ring. And you'll be supporting what we do right here on Working.
Thanks, as always, to Working Overtime's producer, Kevin Bendis, and to our series producer, Cameron Drews. We'll be back on Sunday with a brand new episode of Working, and in 2 weeks, we'll have another Working Overtime. Until then, get back to work. We've all been there. You have a question about your credit card. You call the number for help and can't get a hold of anyone. If only you had a Discover card. With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right, a real person. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.